Kia ora Aotearoa, good evening and welcome to the Union Report, where we review the news week through the lens of industrial disputes with union leaders, commentators and politicians. Joining me tonight to review the week is National Secretary of the Unite Union, Matt McCarten, and Director of Organising at EPMU, Rachel Mackintosh. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, from TY Point to Spring Creek Mines. How many more redundancies can communities take? Issue 2, what does the Burger King dispute tell us about the real state of workers' rights in New Zealand? And issue 3, how do we tackle the overvalued New Zealand dollar that is hurting so many manufacturers and exporters? Plus, we'll wrap with a final thought. But let's start the show with issue 1. Massive job losses are looming at the TY smelter, and the Greymouth community face 200 job losses at the Spring Creek mine. Rachel, how are these communities coping?
In TY Point, people are scared, people are frightened, people can see the demise of their whole community. So 3,200 jobs supported by the smelter in Invercargill. There's only 48,000 people in that community, so it's potentially massive and devastating for those workers. 1,000
people took to the streets in Greymouth. A lot of anger there as well.
That's right. So in Greymouth, there's a strong union tradition there. The community is extremely strong. So when that Spring Creek closure was talked about, the delegates, those union delegates, got motivated and they organised that march, and they were hoping for 500, 1,000 people march through the streets of Greymouth. That's how angry they are, and that's how determined they are.
Do you think government inaction is effectively driving skilled workers to Australia? Is that what we're saying?
That is the essential problem, that the new neoliberal policies of the government over the last 20, 25 years have abandoned communities. They've refused to have an active role in the economy. They say it's hands-off. Actually what it is supporting of big capital and international corporates, and it does abandon communities and just leave them alone.
What is the impact of industry that large in communities that small? What is that impact going to be? Will you see people leaving those towns?
Absolutely. If you listen to the miners in Spring Creek, these are people who have been there for generations. There are memorials up and down that coast. That is a community that is tied to the land in the ways that most of us are not. And what they're talking about is that's the only option they'll have. So 200 jobs at Spring Creek equals 800 jobs in that community that simply won't be there any longer, and people won't stay. They will go to Australia.
Matt, does this show why governments should own large assets? I mean, if Meridian and Solid Energy is sold off, what can the government do to protect those jobs?
Well, it can't do anything, and this is the logical conclusion of what Rachel was saying, of economic policy now for a number of decades. What actually happens when you say the free market will kind of look after it all, this is actually what happens. What happens is that small communities are destroyed as the investment moves offshore or to the major centres. And all over New Zealand, we've had a complete dislocation of the workforce right through the 80s, and it's still continuing on today. And the state has subsidised and supported these industries for many years. You know, we're down at the point, cheap power. You wonder how much of this is actually negotiation, and they play with workers and communities' lives. But you see, in the end, you see, it's when you talk about, you know, we like to blame sort of individuals. It's actually not. You see, because when you run a business, and so the only thing is the bottom line, well, they'll move wherever it goes. You know, of course they have no loyalty. That's why the thing about the state has a responsibility to the community. And in New Zealand, what our politicians of both parties in recent times have not done is taken a New Zealand incorporated approach. You know, say, what do we need to do as New Zealanders to make us independent, to have well-paid jobs, etc. That means intervention. Doesn't mean the free market. The free market means we get to compete with developing countries. That's what that means, and we can't.
Why do you think manufacturing gets such a raw deal here? I mean, we can't bend over backwards fast enough for the agricultural industry.
That's right. But with manufacturing, well, Rachel I mean, she works in this area. But again, you see, it's the free market. We can never compete with developing countries, you see, and there's been a conscious abandonment of manufacturing and secondary skilled levels. You know, when you drive in any part of New Zealand at night, you see the trucks just going past you with the logs on, straight to the the wharf to be shipped off to Korea or Japan to be stored in the harbour until they want to use them, because they actually know about secondary industries. We don't have any foresight of that. We don't have any government response. We just export our jobs offshore. And manufacturing and tariffs coming off on that, it's a crime.
Rachel, the first move by any government preparing asset sales is to slash jobs to make the bottom line look a hell of a lot more attractive for sale. Are we seeing workers losing their employment or having risk of their employment going just to make the sales pitch look better?
Well, that's something that we're extremely worried about. You know, if you look at all the things that are happening at Spring Creek, you know, are they preparing solid energy for sale? And yeah, instead of intervening, as Matt says, you know, taking a stand to protect jobs, to promote jobs, and to increase manufacturing capability in this country, the government has chosen the path of selling off assets. So strategic assets that have strategic value to this country that could be part of New Zealand Inc. if they're maintained and fostered, they're being abandoned, they're being run down.
How ethical do you think it is to play with workers' employments, future employment, just so you can make the brochure look a little bit more attractive for the sales pitch?
Well, it's highly unethical, and it's because that's not the priority of the government. The government is interested in their balance sheet through asset sales, through selling off things that could have future income for New Zealand. They're not interested. They're not focused on jobs. Yeah. They've had one job summit, and pretty much nothing came out of it.
That's right.
Well, yeah, the cycle track is still waiting for the jobs.
Sure,
But here's the thing, you see, is that you have no commitment, like there's no understanding that the stakeholders are not just the customers and the owners, the shareholders and the management, right? You know, that's how the business community now, the world, it sees things. What about the other stakeholders, like the workers and the community, are kind of not even thought about anymore. And you say they are, in one sense, even more of a stakeholder and actually have more ownership of those decisions than the so-called shareholders. And I think that is the underline, you know, throughout all of business now. There's no respect for the workers or for the community at large. You know, which are stakeholders.
Do you think the government's given up on high-skilled manufacturing as an industry in New Zealand?
Well, yes, they say not. But every decision they actually make goes towards, you know, becoming a transit station as our people go to New Zealand. I mean, we've got a ridiculous position now, is that people coming from, say, India and China and much of the Pacific are coming to New Zealand as a backdoor way to get to Australia. So they're not even coming to replace our workforce now, they're just on the transit through. And that's because they're philosophically committed to an ideology of the market will work. The market means we're going to be a tourist sort of destination, and our jobs will be flipping hamburgers and carrying bags for tourists.
Rachel, has globalisation and cheap labour, do you think it's robbed us of the ability to produce in New Zealand?
It has, because of the policy settings that the government has chosen. So that's only one. The strategy of race to the bottom, compete with China if you can, oh whoops you can't, surprise, surprise, that wasn't inevitable. So there is nothing except for politics to stop a country and a government having policy settings that actually support high-level manufacturing, skilled jobs. You can have a skills strategy, you can have a policy that supports value add. So as Matt says, you're not just shipping logs away, you're actually doing something with those logs and keeping the skills, increasing skills and keeping the money turning in this economy and increasing. This government hasn't done that because of the laissez-faire, that's what they choose.
Question to both of you, final question on this one. Unemployment ticked up to 6.8% and the Roy Morgan poll shows a real unemployment rate at 9.1%. How many more unemployed workers can the government get away with before it starts damaging their popularity? What's the level?
Well, how long is a piece of string, sort of, isn't it? I mean, the unemployment figures are meaningless in one sense. It's because when you ask them, do people want more work? It's huge. And so what we have is we have a casualised workforce, a part-time workforce, a tentative workforce which never knows from week to week or month to month about whether they're going to get work and how much. And so when they do these figures, anyone who's employed for an hour a week is classified as being employed, is not logging for work. So what you've got in this country now, you know, the stats show that we work the longest hours. So what we have is amongst our full-time workers. So what we actually have is overemployment and underemployment. That the 40-hour week is long gone. You know, I mean, apart from the civil service and some MPs, the rest of the people are working very much on whatever hours that they can get, and people are working 2, 3 jobs to hang on. And of course, you know, we have all the social costs of what that entails.
At what level does it start to bite into this incredible popularity that national parties seem to have?
And that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, Teflon John, they call him. It's just incredible to us, and that's part of what we want to do, is be part of that debate, be part of changing the consensus so that people can see that there are alternatives, that this is actually not inevitable.
And key is like Obama to some extent, you know, enormously popular, that people like him, you know, and they don't look past, well, yes, but what's he selling? You know, and I suppose that's the grown-up discussion New Zealanders sort of have to have. You know, it's like all products. It's not the sales job. I want to know if it works. At the moment, it's not working. I get a sense it's starting to unravel now. You know, because people are eventually going to stop the sale talk and want to actually hear, does it work? And I think that the message to parties like Labour needs to lift its game in terms of putting this out. I mean, you know, they're absent. You know, they have been somewhat absent from the economic debate, and you know, it's embarrassing is when the Greens do better in opposition. And Winston, of course, is a master. But he's an individual. But what Labour has to do is focus on the economy, focus on the employment level and the jobs and that, and get it into the conversation, because all this is missing from the political discussion. And it's good that you raise up. But any other station and TV station, very rare you actually have debates about jobs and about the economy and what are the policies around it.
It's true. Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. Last month, Unite took action against Burger King for employment practices they claimed were exploitative, especially towards migrant workers. Matt, how widespread is abuse of migrant worker rights in New Zealand right now? What are your thoughts?
Well, as I said you off, you know, before I start, we've settled the dispute with Burger King, so I want to respect that, and there's certain things which I can't say. So we talk about in general terms. The migrant community, and particularly in Auckland, is where you notice it more. It's that it is unfortunately rife. It's a way of being, and I could employ 10 staff full time just to do that. You know, just the thing. You know, when you see some good restaurants, you know, say the restaurant industry, sort of take that. You know, everyone knows the ethnic cuisine. When you go and you say, gee, that meal was cheap. Well, there's a reason why it's cheap. You know, and that people need to take some responsibility there. The Labour Department just tends to ignore it unless it's a crisis. We have people almost open borders of visas that when they come in for, you know, these bodgy sort of language schools, these English language schools, bring them in by the thousands. They're allowed to work to 20 hours a week, and then they're employed and they want to stay because it's an economic life that people don't. I don't blame them for that. And so what they're doing is they promise sort of visas and support. And say for the hotels in Auckland, let's just take as what I do know, a third of the hotels, these accommodation, the tourist hotels, a third of them are on visas. It is rife, and they're just allowed to bring them in. This is the same time New Zealanders can't get employment. Talk about it. And so what we have is, and of course, when you're someone from overseas, you're starting a new life, you'll work whatever. You know, and a lot of the conditions, even though we know they're bad, compared to their own communities, which they come from, you know, they're open to exploitation, long hours. I meet sort of workers who haven't had a day off in a year. I have workers who work in 70, 80 hours a week, living in the back of the kitchen, you know, and so on and so on. So we normally can fix those, because I know how to fix that. You know, I'll tell your customers, and that'll take care of that, not a problem. But you shouldn't have to do this. And so what you've got is fear, and the I've got your visa. Unfortunately, there have been cases, too many to be accidental. Even the big companies, the national companies, have been exploiting it. And I don't mean just fast foods. I'm talking about hotel chains. You know, without even talking about in the agricultural world and out in the work sites, you know, well, that's a whole other world as well.
Rachel, one of the elements here was the anti-union stance of the employer targeting union members and sacking them for being union members. A separate case last week saw a union worker win a $10,000 in compensation for being sacked because they were a union member. Do you think workers are now targeted for being members of unions?
That does happen. That certainly happens. And the indication is that work rights and the rights protections under the law are only as useful as our ability to enforce them.
Sure.
And that's about giving people the courage and making the unions a safe place to be. And one union worker in a four-square shop in Kawakawa, it's much harder to do that for someone like that than it is in a large factory.
Yeah, well, a case with Burger King, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, this was actually a couple of hundred workers left, but all of them were lined up and on leave. And that was an example. I'm not saying it was a deliberate policy of Burger King, but certainly some of the managers understood it was, and that's where we were able to settle it. But you know, unfortunately, it's about managers or owners wanting to cover up some abuses, and to be fair to them, you know, that as the economy hurts, it squeezes, and small business aren't able to pay the bills, so they are doing the shortcuts. You know, and there used to be a time, you say, you know, we used to have national awards, and it was done on the basis, what do you need to earn to be able to live a reasonable life? Now the philosophy is, what can I get away with? You know, that workers' wages are now just a cost, not an investment.
Do you think there are questions to answer over businesses like Burger King being able to hire overseas labour into the New Zealand job market when we've got such high unemployment?
Well, yeah, and again, I'm just careful. Burger King does not do that now. It used to be the case, but not now. But yes, they can. It is pretty open. That, you know, this is about getting experts in, you know, and they've got to have a certain amount of money and skilled workforce. Well, you know, tell me how a waiter can't be employed in the country. So all they've got to do is advertise, but they advertise it in a way, and which no one applies for. But what happens is, and I'm being very careful, I'm choosing my words very carefully here, it tends to be in the communities itself as well. You know, there is very much regional sort of immigration from certain parts of certain countries, and there is a kind of a larger family connection, and India, as you know, has got a caste system. So you know, there is quite a lot, and New Zealanders don't really understand this, and so there is a lot of pressure for people to be quiet, or there'll be trouble. And so, and language, of course, is also a major issue.
Rachel, Labour Minister Kate Wilkinson has said that she will investigate claims that migrant workers are being exploited and underpaid by small business owners. But is that at odds, do you think, with the new business-friendly focus of Stephen Joyce's new super ministry? Now we don't have a separate Labour department. Do you think that was a mistake?
Well, the government can't come out openly and say they're not going to investigate exploitation.
Of course they're not.
Of course they're not. The Labour Department, I mean, you know, we've been grappling with the Labour Department for years and their lack of resources. And, you know, there are abuses that go on that the Labour Department, the staff there would love to investigate.
And they have been instructed not to investigate because they don't have the resourcing. Look, I've had calls from and they say, we have been instructed to work with the employer to change its behaviour, but it's requesting them, not dictating to them. And that's a policy by this government.
Do you think, does the EPMU think that the MOBI, bringing all those departments together, was a failure? It was a bad idea?
Anything that takes the focus off jobs and labour and like the area that we're in, which is about workers' rights and improving conditions, any dilution of that is going to have a negative effect on workers.
Final question to both of you here. How do unions protect migrant workers' rights without angering the domestic workforce?
Well, one of the things I think is very good, and our union, you know, that almost half of our membership are migrant workers, and so. And so, you know, in the past it's been a struggle, but you see what we've done now, and you're saying no, you know, if people are working the same pay for the same job, no matter who they are, what gender they are, what race they are, how old they are. They're doing the same work, and that has been pretty good. And people no longer, well, I don't get a lot of back. They're taking jobs off us,
right?
And that is the sort of the racist card. It can be used. These are workers, and what we're finding is that providing the work when people are employed is delegated sort of fairly and openly. That people are seeing, you know, their fight is my fight,
right?
And people aren't innately racist, but it can be used when there's a sort of they're taking our jobs, one party in particular in this country
does that quite well. Yes. How do you think unions reach out to migrant workers without annoying their own members?
Well, we have the same experience as Matt, basically. We're an organising union who spends a lot of time talking with workers and talking about how power works. And we do find that our members see the migrant workers who are working alongside them, often on worse conditions. They understand that exploitation.
Right.
And that same thing, their fight is our fight.
Right.
Right.
And it's a decent, it's about your mate's keeper.
Gotcha.
And also there is the crass one, if you want to really get blunt, is if they can get away with them, they're going to undercut you and make your job more difficult.
Right. Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3, how do we tackle the overvalued New Zealand dollar that is hurting so many manufacturers and exporters? Matt, isn't this where the financial transaction tax would be a major plus for the manufacturing industry, because it would make our currency less attractive to speculate and it would curb demand while raising hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue?
Well, yes, but you're ahead of the play. And we don't have time to go into it. But yes, the financial transaction tax, or the Robin Hood tax, is actually becoming more and more popular and understood. There's parts of Canada now have it, and in France. Both of the presidential candidates at the last election put it up. And this is extraordinary because, you know, for viewers, it's when they discuss, the Bankers Association, when they discuss having GST in this country in '84, they recommended this tax instead of GST, and it was headed by Dr. Don Brash.
That's right,
in fact. And so it is more efficient. It's a tax collected through the banks instead of a lot of the other taxes. And a 1% tax will raise as much as GST. But you see, you know, the finance markets don't want it because they clip the ticket, they make their money, but it is the most efficient. It's collected through. Now people say, oh, it all sounds very complicated. Well, it's not. Remember, you pay about 50 cents or $1 each time you put your POS transaction. That's all it is.
And that extra money would dampen the speculation.
It would dampen that. I mean,
currency.
we mugs. I mean, this country's always been mugged. It's been driven by ideology instead of common sense. And so we are a speculator's dream. And it just comes on creams off us. It raises up the price of our dollar, make it harder and harder for exporters. So all this research and development and support for things. No, we got an inflated dollar. But you see, we don't like to manage. See, we just say, oh no, the market will take care of it. So we're a little island in the lower end of the Pacific.
And yet we're the 11th most traded currency on the planet.
Yeah, because they know how to make money off us. The dentist in Belgium each night clips the ticket because money comes out and comes in overnight.
Rachel, the EPMU says the level of the New Zealand dollar can be the difference between a thriving business that's employing new staff and a struggling business that's making redundancies. And it's crucial if we're going to stem the flow of job losses and build a modern, high-value and high-skilled manufacturing sector. What do you think we should be doing about our overvalued dollar?
Well, the narrow focus of monetary policy on that 1 to 3 inflation band, and that is one of the major things that keeps the dollar high. What we want to do is actually be part of the debate. We want to lead the debate in this country. We want to challenge the consensus that says laissez-faire economics is what's going to get us there. So we want to explore all policy settings that can take money away from the speculative economy, that keeps the dollar high, and into the real economy. So that's supporting manufacturing. That is research and development as part of it. So financial transactions tax, capital gains tax, we want to look at all those kind of ideas. We want to involve anybody in the debate who's prepared to challenge the consensus. So unions, communities, some employers will want to challenge that consensus as well. Manufacturing employers certainly do. So we want to be part of that conversation, and we want to have practical steps that we can call on this government to do and make to change those settings.
Question to both of you. What would happen to our love of cheap imports if we suddenly have to pay more for them? I mean, won't a plus for exporters mean a loss for importers? Is that a cost we're happy to live with?
Well, yes. I mean, when we say about the exporting and importing of luxury goods, who buys them?
Yeah, yeah.
The people have actually had huge tax cuts. So that's
Yeah.
why we've seen a transfer of wealth. They say, oh, this will trickle down and create jobs. It does nothing of the sort. You know, a BMW you pay 100 grand for.
Yeah.
What job does that create in New Zealand? It's like the logs which go out. You've got these luxury items which almost have no extra tax on it. And that's part of the problem in this country, that the wealth which is being created, all this money which has been transferred through tax cuts and then the poor are paying more, it's that money has not been built on job creation. It's all going offshore and in the speculative doing of buying housing, which that ordinary New Zealanders can't buy. So what we've got is we've got a third of New Zealanders, you know, have got more than one home.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's all into the properties. You've got a third who are just been able to keep their own home through paying a mortgage, and a third of New Zealanders who will never have a home because all this money is speculate like 18 and not put into growth, and that's why the transaction tax and the capital gains tax are better taxes. What we do is we tax income of workers and of small companies, but actually all these speculating going into property and land and all that doesn't have to produce anything and doesn't have to pay any tax.
Do you think we're far too focused on the consumer and making those toys and gadgets from overseas cheaper rather than building jobs here in New Zealand?
Yeah, well, when you build jobs here in New Zealand, consumers actually have more money to spend on quality items.
Yeah. The final question to both of you: after 3 decades of free market economic policy, does New Zealand have the ability to step out of the floating currency model to strengthen the hand of exporters?
New Zealand does. It's political courage that is required.
Yeah.
There are many things that can be done to support an export manufacturing economy, and the healthy economies in this world are manufacturing centred with high quality, integrated skills strategy and support for real jobs. Do
we have the intellectual grunt to carry the argument?
Well, we're losing it to Australia every week. We certainly don't have the political courage as what's needed. I think it's not intellectual heft which needs to be done. There's always enough of that around once a clear decision is made of what we want to do, and that we need to resource it. But in fact, we have the opposite, and that's our problem. It's a lack of leadership and a lack of common sense that we've got ourselves into the trouble we're in now.
Thank you, panel. Let's wrap the show with a final word. Matt, your final word this week is?
Well, I just wanted to make a point about our capitulation to overseas investment, and you talked about jobs and about competing. When I first started I'm a union negotiator, and one of the things I do with new money when it comes in and buys up on the cheapest property, first negotiation I have: welcome to New Zealand. Now, as a guest, you'll know that in New Zealand there's some expectations of which we expect, and that changes the debate. We don't do enough of that. And when these companies threaten, we'll go and move to India or Indonesia or Philippines or somewhere. And it's happened. I say, I think you should. Because we can't compete. Let me pack your bags and take you to the airport. There's no such thing as having to kowtow to business in industry. This country comes first.
Rachel, your final word this week.
Yeah. So I want to be able to go to the west coast of the South Island, talk to a miner and say, you are part of a union that's a campaigning union, that's part of a campaigning union movement that reaches out to the community and that leads the debate so that we can grow a manufacturing, high-skilled economy where everybody in this country can work and have decent jobs, and the movement's strong.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Matt. That's it for the show. Check out our Facebook site for ongoing union campaigns and actions, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter account for all the latest show updates. Thanks for watching Whānau. Join us again 8 PM next Monday for the Union Report here on Triangle TV, the home of original public broadcasting. Good night, New Zealand.